Word of God. And if you've done it for a while, you know how to look at your audience and read them.
That's right.
And right, Pat Reverend Haynes told me when he first started preaching that he would look up to the ceiling, that he
Mm,
was so intimidated to be looking at the congregation. He was look, or he'd set his eyes on a light and preach to the light.
yeah,
That's so
yeah.
funny. And
I've seen
he,
other people do that.
yeah, and but I have to see the audience. I have to see my audience because
Hmm.
they will tell you whether or not you are speaking to them or whether or not, you know, you've lost them completely.
Yeah.
And this this past this past Sunday, I preached, and um, there are times when I want to actually bring the congregation into the message. So I ask us a few questions from the pulpit, which will have obvious answers. You're not going to embarrass anybody. And two or three people will scream out the answer, and I affirm them. So everybody else is getting all set up for the next thing. Last Sunday, I called three people to come up to make comments about what I was saying, and they were going to testify, and they came up and they did it. And so, if I feel that the audience is not with me, or it's too hot, I can see that we don't have air conditioning in this sanctuary.
Mm,
I just try to utilize some of the things I used to do when I was the youth pastor
mm.
in getting people back engaged. So I really enjoyed myself last Sunday, and I'll be preaching again this Sunday. And again,
Oh.
I only preach once a month,
Mm.
but a couple of the pastors have some physical, medical related concerns.
Mm.
So I'm not going to impose upon them
Yeah. Well,
to pre
culture is a very powerful thing in the preaching moment, and
Hmm.
it's one of the great joys of African American preaching to basically have a call and response to for the congregation to feel they're involved
Hmm.
in the preaching, that they can speak back to the pastor in, you know, in very short phrases that are encouraging, that but they show the preacher the people are with me.
Right,
In
right.
white congregations generally, especially in Presbyterian congregations, you're going to get a hard stare, you know, because they're concentrating. They're focused. They're trying. Some people are taking notes, but they're staring at you. And if you're not used to that, that's really intimidating. And we talk about, you can tell like the Holy Ghost is moving when you get a grunt. Somebody leans forward in their chair and they go, you know, and
Well, really, do you speak to them and say, I'm used to having
oh
people
yeah, I do.
affirm.
I do.
And so how do they respond in this church when you do
Well,
that?
the great thing is white people can be taught. That's what I've learned. You can teach, they don't, nobody has to be stuck in their culture. You can tell people,
Right,
okay, look, I need some affirmation. If I'm saying
right,
something that's correct, let me know. Say it out loud. Say amen in the appropriate places.
right.
You know, don't wait. I need to stop now. Amen. No, no, that's not an appropriate moment.
Oh, that's good. So when you ask people to affirm you or just let you know that they're still there,
Hmm.
um, do you do that throughout the message or you just plant that seed and keep going?
Well, I might say it one time, but it depends. Like I'll say, sometimes I'll just stop after I said something that I thought was really significant. I say, that that point right there, that was an amen moment,
Mm.
and I didn't hear anything, you know.
Mhm. Right, right. Or you say, or you, Randy, you say, I'm not going to speak to this side anymore. I'm going over here to speak to this side. So you reject the people that aren't responding to you. You make them mad. They all walk out. So all you have
Yeah,
left is
yeah,
people on the
yeah.
other side.
I used to have a pastor friend who would say, he'd be preaching, nobody would be responding. He'd say, Amen, lights.
Right, 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 right. Some pastors who are good at making those comments without
Yeah, yeah.
offending your congregation have done a good job with it. So your pastor is preaching through a book in your next Sunday,
Mm.
and so I'll be in the pulpit next Sunday. So I'll set up a couple screens of you preaching in your church, me preaching here, and I'll ask the congregation which which preacher made the point. You hear
Oh
what I'm
my,
saying?
my, don't, I always feel like I've not preached well enough. There's always more to learn. Um, I really appreciate it when I get good feedback of this is, we needed more application, or you should have told us how, or, you didn't explain that point. And, and sometimes I do, I'll set up a point and then I get carried away about something else.
Yeah.
And it's like the people are going, ah,
Right,
you know,
right, right. You walk
yeah,
away from it because you're going to something else. But in their minds, they're saying, "Can you come back and finish
that's
what you
right.
just?"
That's right. Please come back. We're left hanging out here.
So, do your people email you, or do they just talk with you after service and tell you?
Both, you know, uh, this last Sunday, I led the worship in the 11 o'clock service, and often I'm asked to do the pastoral prayer
Okay.
and, or a prayer of intercession. And, this week, I don't know, I got a lot of response from my prayer. Um, and that embarrasses me, because I would really like to be invisible in my prayer. I'm just trying to pray for the people, pray for the affairs of the world, pray about uh, people. We're sending, we had two teams out in mission. We have a team right now in Kenya that my son is leading, a medical mission in Kibera, which is a slum in Nairobi.
Yeah.
And so our people are really focused on sending people out and keeping them in prayer, um, and praying for our nation. I prayed against violence, this
Yeah.
attempted assassination with Trump, and praying against violence during this campaign. The campaign's not over.
Yeah.
That might not be the only act of violence we experience.
Right.
And
Right.
we just, it's I remember Colin Powell, his wife did not want him going into politics. You know, he was always, he was a military man, then he wound up being Secretary of State, and so he was a very public figure. But when you run for office, there are a lot of crazies out there.
Yeah.
And so, you know, uh, Kamala Harris looks like she's going to be the nominee for the Democrats. She's already got enough delegates. I heard this morning she has to have 1,900 delegates. She has 2,600.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
committed to her already before the convention.
Yeah.
So looks like she's going to have it. And, you know, I hope they really tighten up that Secret Service protection. They really messed up with Trump's protection. That was terrible.
Did you watch any of the hearings on yesterday in Washington with the
No,
Secret
I didn't.
Service?
I didn't watch them, but I did hear reports, summations. And basically, the head of the Secret Service said we messed up. It was the greatest operational failure. You
Mhm.
know, and here's a guy. People saw him. People even got pictures of him on the
Yeah.
roof
Yeah.
and tried to tell people there's a guy up there.
Where in history have we ever read about the people seeing the shooter or the assassin
Mm,
before that person shoots? One is yelling and screaming, and he's still able to get a shot off and
mm.
shoot his intended party. So, yeah, see, there were a lot of things that the Secret Service leader, president, captain, whatever the term is, said, I cannot share that information. I cannot divulge. And the more she said that, the more they became very angry with her. They were even
Yeah.
swearing. They were swearing at her.
Wow. Wow.
So
Well, yeah,
it
I could
was
see their
nowhere.
frustration. But
Yeah,
like she said we're still investigating how this happened.
right,
And so in some ways, they're asking her, tell us the results of your investigation before you do your investigation.
correct.
which
correct.
is silly. I mean, she's admitting, she said, look, we screwed up and I'm the head of the Secret Service. I take full responsibility. So eventually she's going to have to step down. You
Yeah,
know, when the investigation is over,
yeah,
uh, there'll be no more reason for her to stay, you know, and the president, Biden, should say, yeah, I'll accept your resignation because
right,
that should not have happened. If you
right,
say you're responsible, okay, now take responsibility.
right, right. Yeah, yeah, she knows she's going, and sometimes these congressional hearings are a lot of nothing because they know that the information that they're seeking is not going to come out to the public. They know that.
Mm.
So so the question is, what are they doing? They're posturing.
Yeah,
They're
posturing. Good word.
right. They're before the world,
Mm-hmm.
and they're the people that voted for them, and they're really laying in. She had the director had to sit there and take all of that. And yes, as you said, she admitted to the mistake, but she had to sit there like a trooper and take all the insults and
Mm-hmm.
insinuations. You should be fired. You should be demoted. They really were tough on her, but I don't know if it's still going today. I don't know if it's a 3 day because they want everybody on this committee wants to ask their questions, and I'm not sure if they finished it yesterday. So, um, talking, you had mentioned the election and security. They better really ramp this up, but they're saying that they don't even have enough Secret Service agents because they do more than just cover the presidents,
Oh yeah.
right? They do. I didn't know that. I thought that that's all they did. They do investigations.
Mm-hmm.
They're doing a number of things that I never thought fell under their purview. So they're
Well,
gonna
and
need help.
yeah, and they can get help. You know, like my son is a special agent in the FBI,
Okay.
and when they have a joint congressional meeting, they will put. My son has often patrolled the Capitol with a Secret Service agent. You
Oh,
know, they'll reach out to other federal agencies, and they'll say we need additional people. And so you have the U.S. Marshal Service, you have the Drug Enforcement Agency. All of those are federal officers. So there are thousands of them, you know. And then you have the Border Patrol. You know, these aren't military people; these are police people. And then
right.
if you need them, you got the military.
Yeah.
You know, and basically all you have to do is ask. You know, or you could say, and then the first question every agency has, who's paying for their time? You know, say, okay, well, we'll just transfer the money. But if you need it, you can get it. And usually, what they do in this case down in Butler, Pennsylvania, was they asked the local police authorities, would you cover this area? You know, because we're going to be close in.
Mhm.
And, you know, the Secret Service used to work for the Treasury Department.
Okay.
Now, Homeland Defense also, I think, is involved with them, but they also take care of counterfeit money. They investigate that in terms of crime. And they cover not just the president, but they cover all the ex-presidents and the
Mhm.
vice president
Mhm.
and anybody else. Like if the president of the United States says, look, there's threats against Dr. Fauci, which there were.
Yeah.
Hey, he's a doctor, you
Yeah.
know, he's working for the National Institutes of Health in a very specific area of viruses. And he's getting death threats because he says you should get a shot.
Yeah.
And so people, and you know, and some of that comes from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, says you should be in prison. You've committed crimes against humanity.
Mhm.
So some idiot says, "Yeah, I want to kill Dr. Fauci," and
Mhm.
so all of a sudden we have to pay for all this 24/7 security for him and his family. You know,
Can you say that again, what you just said, the way you said it? We're going to get Dr. Buffy. I received a few telephone calls of people saying they're going to get me, and they sounded just like you. Was that you who called me?
well then in that case, I'm not going to say that again because you might be able to
So
trace that. You know.
I'm going to take you, Bruce Walton. It sounds familiar. So my last comment is, how does a person go from being the Vice President of the United States in a position where the president is getting all the visibility, doing a lot of the strategy work, and overnight you become the candidate, become the leader, the president of the United States of America on the international scene right now. Everybody has switched from Biden, international leaders, to her. How do you adjust to that
Well, that's the nature.
emotionally? How do you?
That's the nature of being a vice president. That could happen to you, like it did with JFK, when
Mhm,
his assassination, and all of a sudden LBJ is taking the oath of office on Air Force One,
mhm,
and it can happen just instantaneously, where all of a sudden all the power goes to you. Now the power has not been transferred yet. President Biden is still our president. He will be president up and until the inauguration of whoever the next president is going to be. But yeah, politically, everybody realizes, oh, okay, the new power in town is most likely going to be Kamala Harris.
mhm,
And I'll just tell you a few predictions that I had given my wife and I. Several years ago, when Trump was still running, he was just first running for office. I wrote an article, and I said Trump is the worst thing that has ever happened to conservatives. And the reason I said that is what's going to happen is conservatives are going to wind up being in bed with this man and
mhm,
identified with this man.
mhm,
And eventually, the whole left side of the country, those who are liberal, they are going to respond to him. And I think that has happened. It's already happened with Biden winning. And I think if Kamala runs against him, I think she'll win. And so all the causes that conservatives yearned to have represented are going to be almost swept aside. Now when he was the president, he got conservative Supreme Court justices and
yeah,
judges,
yeah,
some of whom are not qualified to be judges. But he is the worst thing that has happened to the conservative movement because they had a choice. Those conservatives had a choice to pick good candidates. They could have picked people who had common sense and who
mhm,
had some intelligence and
mhm,
and weren't isolationists and ready to destroy NATO and had no compassion to immigration and to migrants. Um, they could have chosen somebody who was a good person, had character, personal morality, as well as some good politics. Not maybe liberals wouldn't agree with it, but it was still somebody you could respect. Well, they abandoned that to take on this populist in Trump. And I
mhm,
think it's hurt the conservative movement going forward for many years. That was one of my predictions. I think it's come true.
mhm.
The other one I told Joan just a month or so ago, I said, next year we may not have either one, Biden or Trump, as president. Now, in a way, you always have the 50% chance of that because only one of them is going to be elected.
Sure.
But even before this assassination attempt, I've fully thought it was possible one of these men would die. One of these men could die of a stroke, of a heart attack. They're both old. Okay.
Yes.
You and I are old.
Speak for yourself.
Okay. You're older. But um, but at any time we could have lost one of them. So it's
Mm,
not that surprising to me. And I do think Kamala Harris has always had to have in her mind as a vice president, I might I might get a phone call at any time, day or night, saying, ma'am, you are now the next president of the United States. And so I
mm,
think she's fully ready to step up. You know, she's had a lot of experience in the courts as a district attorney, as an
mm.
attorney general, now as the leader of the Senate, as the vice president. So she was a senator. she knows she knows the game of politics and she knows how things work in Washington. She's fully equipped to take on the role. As to whether or not her value system, uh, her ability to decide rightly, we don't really know that yet. We don't know how she'll do in a crisis with foreign affairs, with war. Those are things, but here's the reality. Any president we have ever elected for the first time, nobody knows how they'll do. That's something that comes out on the stage of the moment. And you just hope they've got the character, the intelligence, the wisdom to be able to handle it.
Do you think that the pressure coming from the press was instrumental in President Biden finally saying, I have to sit down? Do you think? Because it was nonstop. And the more the press talked about it, the more we had the elected officials saying, this is where the press wants us to go. This is where we're going to go. Because if we go there, we'll get coverage. You know, that's the way that game is played.
Well, that was certainly a factor. I do think his abysmal performance in his debate with Trump, and the question wasn't, are your policies better than Trump? The question is, can you finish a sentence that makes sense? Dude, can we have the confidence in you as the leader of our country that you've got all your marbles together?
Excuse me. Could you repeat those two sentences? I couldn't understand what you just said.
Oh man, I'm so old I can't remember what I just said.
Yeah,
But
you're right. You're right. That was what everybody was saying.
yeah, and here's the issue. If the issue is your age, how can you fix that? You're not going to get younger.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
it was like doomed, and the pressure would only grow. And I think he did a heroic thing, because I think he thinks he's been a good president. I think he thinks he's got the right the values compared to Trump. I think he really wanted to make sure that Trump was not going to be the next president.
right.
And he thought, well, since I'm already the incumbent, I got a best shot at defeating him. But when his fallibility as being older was so revealed, I'm really thankful that he was humble enough to listen to people and say, you're right. It's better for the country, certainly better for the Democratic Party. And I think that's one of the great faults that both of these men have had. They have not groomed younger people to take their place. President Biden did have Kamala as his vice president. Trump didn't have anybody. Now he's got Vance, who is obviously younger. But if you don't, in leadership, you've got to be preparing. We've talked about this many times as senior pastors. You have got to be preparing younger people to step in. We're I don't know about you, but I know I'm not going to be here forever. Your people have immersed you in formaldehyde, so you seem to last eternally. But people like me, we're going to fade from the scene. We've got to turn this thing over to younger people.
And the newest thing that is coming against the president is they're now saying, if you feel that you cannot run for a second term, does it also say that you cannot even finish the end of your first term? You need to resign. That's the newest thing that's coming out. Have you heard?
No, I'm not surprised, but I don't think he needs to resign. I don't think he is feeble in his brain. I just think he's suffering what we all do, that sometimes he forgets a word, he forgets a name. That doesn't mean that he's not able to make wise and good decisions. And I think he's got a pretty competent staff around him to help him. So no, I don't fear for his choices right now. That's the issue of the presidency, and it's the issue of leadership. and that is choices, decision making. Are you able to make them? Are you able to make the right ones? Are you able to make them under pressure? Are you able to explain them so people can follow you? That's the essence of really great leadership.
And as it relates to the Defense Department, they brief him with alternatives. Things, this is happening. These are the things that we think we should do.
Mm-hmm.
And he has to make a choice as to which ones he's going to choose, right? First, he has to make sure he understands what they're saying to him.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's just not the Defense Department coming to talk with him. There are other aides and assistants and other political leaders that are with him. So he's going to take all this in, and then he's going to make a decision. So you feel your opinion is that he can still do that.
Yeah, I don't fear for that for right now. I think he's still able to. Now the Republicans, of course, they wanted to paint the picture that this man was senile.
Yes.
That is not the case. If it was, I think his own staff. Now, I think people were afraid Trump was getting senile at the end of his presidential term because people were talking about this guy is so wild, we don't know what he will decide. And they were ready. There's an article in the Constitution where the cabinet can appeal to have the powers of the presidency removed from the president because he has become an imbecile or because he's incapable or incompetent of fulfilling his duties. And I think Biden is fine with that, but I don't think he's a good candidate because his age has overcome him.
Yeah, but he has political leaders who will respond to whatever he wants them to do. How he can, how he is able to lead people, and then to see the church split. The church is split on supporting him or not supporting him. Where do you think that leadership, where do you think that aura comes from in his life? How is he? I could see him leading other elected officials and intimidating them, but intimidating the church or having the church believe that he's one with them. How is he able to achieve that?
Well, I'm trying to understand what you're asking me about. You're asking me about Biden and the church?
No, Donald Trump. How
Oh,
he's
okay.
able, he has split the church.
Yes, he
Randy,
has.
Randy, how many fingers do I have up?
I think there are three there, right? Okay.
All right.
I just try. You switched to talking about Trump, and I was still thinking about Biden, and I
Okay,
apologize
all
for
right,
that,
okay, all
even
right.
though it was your fault.
Yeah. I was before you said that, I was gonna say, can your brain keep up with me? By the
No,
way,
no, never has been.
no, the reason why it doesn't keep up with me is that I'm so slow. You're already down the other road. There's Sybil Woodstock is watching us on Facebook, and she's one of the people that came to me before the service, quoting some of the things that we say on
Mm,
the air to make sure I understood that she was watching, and I
mm.
sent her a greeting from us this morning. So how is Donald Trump, and then we'll get off of that. I have a question to ask you. How is Donald Trump able to lead the churches to follow him no matter what, no matter what the character issues, no matter
Mm.
what the cases he's gone through, no matter what they said he's done to people? How is it? Why do you think the church is split on this?
Well, I can give you several opinions. One is a uh, metaphysical, spiritual opinion, and that is
Hold on.
demonic delusion and deception.
Hmm.
Um, the other is um, the ability of conservatives to put policy above everything else. They became hypocrites. A lot of the evangelical world became hypocrites when they said about the Clintons, we can't support him as a Democratic president because of his immorality.
Okay.
What he did in the Oval Office,
Yeah.
his philandering with other women.
Yeah.
So character for us is the important thing. We will not support him. Then Trump comes along, and he's already a known philanderer, adulterer, cheats on his wives. They're pregnant. He goes have sex with somebody else, divorces them. Man of terrible character. Man who welches on like what he did in Jersey City, in his casinos, where he basically declared bankruptcy and left the city out to dry, left thousands of people out to dry who were employees, and he gets away with it. He walks away. You can't touch my personal wealth because that was a business bankruptcy, and I'm just using it as a business scheme. But there's a terrible lack of character there. So the evangelicals became hypocrites when they said, oh, well, with Clinton, it was character. But with Trump, no, he's got the right policies. And so we're going to stick with him no matter what his character is. And so you say, wait a minute, if character was important with Clinton, whose policies actually helped our country, and the things that he did economically, I don't like what Clinton did in foreign policy, but what he did in the welfare situation, he brought a lot of people out of welfare. His desire for Obamacare, which was not a thing, but at the time he was trying to get health insurance for people. President Obama finally accomplished it. His policies were sound, but the Republicans, the conservatives, hate Democrats for their policies. And so basically what evangelicals did said, we've changed our tune. It doesn't matter what the character is. And some of them were so crazy as to say Trump is actually God's man. He's God's man for the time. And they equated him with Cyrus in the Bible, because Isaiah said, Cyrus will come and send our people back from captivity. Now, this was written hundreds of years before Cyrus was even born. This was a biblical prophecy about a coming Persian king who would be God's instrument to set Israel free. And so people said, well, see, Cyrus wasn't a Christian. He wasn't a believer in God, but yet he was God's man for the time. That's who Trump is. And so that's how some evangelicals will deal with the character issues.
Well, the church is troubled, and I'm troubled by what the church has gone through. And my last comment on this is that I was told that there was a large, a huge interracial church. And when all of this stuff was going on with the former President Donald Trump and different Black people being killed by police, all of that was happening. And some of the Black members of the church wanted their white pastor to make at least some comments or set up some forums so that the church could talk about it. And the members of the church said, if that's what you want to talk about, you might as well leave. And so we were seeing an exodus from the predominantly white interracial churches of Black folk who were not going back to the traditional churches, Black church. They weren't going back there, and they were not going to try to find another pastor or church led by a pastor who supported Donald Trump and those positions. It was a very confusing time for a lot of Black churchgoers. I don't know where they've gone, but I was hearing from even friends who were caught, and I said, "Why are you leaving? Pastor won't address any of these issues, and is supporting Donald Trump 100%." Again, I intentionally do not talk about politics in the pulpit. I don't talk about the president. I don't talk about the former president. I did go so far I was talking prophetically about what I think was going to happen, and I made it clear that I was not a Democrat or Republican. I'm an independent. I should have said I'm just a Christian believer. You know, In your church, does your pastor mention the election at all? Encourage people to go out and vote? Does he come close to that at all, or does he leave it
Not
alone?
yet, not yet. We have talked about economics and politics and philosophy, like on a Wednesday night series.
Okay,
Went through a whole thing about capitalism and about just war theory and all these kind of things. We're trying to do it from a biblical point of view,
okay,
and I do respect my pastor in terms of his. He is very committed to our ministry to the poor. I wouldn't be here if that wasn't true. Um, and so part of that is a commitment to justice.
mm,
Um, but no, politics is not ever talked about from the pulpit, except like last Sunday, I prayed for Trump, I prayed for
yeah,
Biden, and I prayed
right,
against violence
right,
in our culture. Um, and people were very thankful that I did that. Um,
right,
but no, we do not. We are not one of those evangelical churches that says this is God's candidate. We are not a liberal black church that says this is God's candidate. You know, because you
right,
get on both sides. You know, where politicians at election time, they, you know, when I was a senior pastor in New City, we'd have politicians show up during the worship service. You know, and they'd want to be introduced.
right,
You know, and now, if you're an elected official, in my opinion, and you come, you're welcome to come to one of my services, and I'd love for you to get up and give a word of greeting because you're an elected. You've already been chosen by the people. And even though
mhm,
you're a politician, we still are bound to respect and obey you in your
mm,
proper role. So I don't have any problem with that. But no, I don't like the idea of politicians coming. One of the coolest things that ever happened to me was once a mayor of Chattanooga was elected, and
okay,
somebody called me and said, "You know that mayor goes to your church." And I said, "What?" I said,
mm,
the man who was just elected mayor of Chattanooga goes to New City." He said, "Yeah." He sits up in the balcony, but I said, "He's never introduced himself." So I called him, and he said, "Oh, hi, Randy." And
ha,
I said, "I had no idea." And I said, "Can I come down and to City Hall and pray for you?" He said, "Come on." And so I just prayed over him in his office, you know, and we became friends. But
yeah,
he basically refused to use his attendance at New City as political leverage. He wanted to keep
yeah,
his faith out of his politics.
yeah,
But I wanted his faith to drive his politics in terms of
right,
doing good.
right, right, right. Well, the question that I wanted to ask you, we had an event here at the church, a fundraiser for the radio and TV station, trying to raise support. We do it every other month. We have a concert, and all the artists come in for free to perform and minister to people. This is our third one we had on this past Sunday. We had a one of the guest artists that was with us.
For
Um,
those of you who don't understand that language, when he says artists, he's talking about artists. Okay, just people to know. Keep going. I'm with you.
I understand you. I understand you. Put your sentences together. Um, one of the artists took us by surprise and did more than what he was asked to do.
Uh-oh.
And some people actually, I've never had this before. Some because of the things that he was saying, some people were getting up and walking out because they were not. It wasn't good. And
Mm.
so we were trying to decide what we were going to do. The two hosts in the pulpit were trying to figure out what they should do. I was sitting in the back and I was trying to figure out what I should have done. The person who's running the sound system trying to figure it out. My wife got up and came over to me. She said, "I'm going to trip and fall on the sound system and crush it and cave it in." And I'll say it was an accident. I said, "No, Karen, because we have two more singers." Uh,
Oh
and
my
so
goodness.
so we decided we played some music for his next song. He heard it, stopped the talking, and sang and finished his set, but the damage was already done.
Yeah.
Um, In some instances, I have actually approached somebody in a service and said that what they were doing was inappropriate. Or I had two ladies that every Sunday when they came to church, one would drop down in the aisle when the offering was being collected, just collapse in the aisle, and the other would point their finger at me when I was preaching and stayed on their feet, pointing their finger for the duration of my message. And
Wow.
so I tried to have a conversation with both of them. Um, and we they came into my office and we had a conversation, but they said, if you have a problem with what we're doing and what we're saying, speak to daddy, because daddy's telling us to do it. It was crazy. So they refused, and there were new people coming into the church, Randy, and when they saw this, they went right out the door.
Yeah.
And so I typed up a no trespassing because I didn't want to go to court. Not to say that I wouldn't. No trespassing. I typed up a document, and when they got up and they started doing what they were doing, I left the pulpit with the paper in my hand, gave each of them one, and said, you have been publicly served." That stopped it. But this past Sunday, I couldn't have done that. Have you ever had something, a person who's inappropriate in your congregation, and how did you handle it? Did you usher them out? Did you let them finish and then maybe talk to them later? What did you do?
Well, I have, for the sake of the congregation, come up behind somebody,
Okay.
and said, what you just heard was not the stand of our congregation. That was this individual. They overstepped their bounds. This should not have been said. We apologize. But
Mm-hmm.
you don't always know what a person's going to do until they do it.
Yeah.
But it is important for the pastor, I think, and the leadership to get up right away and say, this was inappropriate. So you know the stand of our church. This is not where we're at. And and sometimes you have, like, one time I used to have these people come by during elections, and they would give um, what they called voter information. And it really wasn't voter information, it was voter propaganda. It was
Ah,
for their political party. And they say, if
okay.
you're a true Christian, you ought to stand on these 10 things. And like a strong national defense. And I'm thinking, where is that in the Bible? You know?
Mm,
And so somebody came up to me and they were angry, said, we're leaving the church because you allowed these to be put on the back table. And I
mm,
said, I didn't even know they were on the back table.
mm.
But since you pointed it out to me, I will, in the pulpit, get up and say, by the way, this is not an official document of the church. And please, ushers, if you see it, please remove it.
Right, right,
So
right.
sometimes it's somebody like that gets up in front of the whole congregation and does something that really is offensive and is causing a problem. And sometimes it's paper that's put out. But the church always has to be vigilant about that. There is no sure defense against it. And
Hmm.
people will blame you and they say, why did you let that happen?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
yeah.
But I will speak to it, definitely. And I've had
Mhm.
even assistant pastors where I've said, look, if you do this, I'm going to come up right behind you and say that was out of line. And so, oh, don't do that. Don't do it. You'll embarrass me. Well, in that case, don't do it.
Mm, mm. And did they listen to you? Did they?
Uh, with resistance, yes, because they knew I would do what I said I would do.
Mm, mm.
And I do think there are
We,
some senior pastors who don't have the courage
yeah,
to speak to those kind of situations.
right, right. And I agree. And the other thing that happened last Sunday, just before the concert, across the street, down about almost half a block, there were a group of people who were outside with their automobiles, and they had these big sound systems
Oh
in
man.
their cars, and they opened the doors, and they were all sitting by the library, smoking and drinking and enjoying a Sunday. That's what they do in the neighborhood. But the
Uh-huh.
sound is deafening. You can hear the sound a block away, right?
Yeah.
So so this is the second time they did it. The first time, I approached them. I went by myself. And I didn't ask the men of the church to come with me because it could have been perceived as confrontational. So
Mm,
I approached somebody, shook their hand. They, none of them spoke English, so they said they didn't speak English.
mm,
So I tried to explain as best I can. I'm a pastor across the street. We're having a service. Could
mm,
you bring could you bring the volume down for an hour and a half? And we would appreciate it. And I walked back to the church, and they shook their head and they did it. So this time it was worse though. I mean, the booming was
mm.
shaking the glass in the church. It was crazy. I did the same thing. I went across the street to the church that was closer to them and saying, "How can you have a service with them making all this noise?" And the guy is a Spanish-speaking church. He spoke English and said, "We just turn our system up higher than their system, and that's how we do it." And I said, "Oh, all right." I said, "Well, we're not going to do it that way." So I went across the street and approached this new group of people. They were staring at me, and they were again they didn't speak English. God sent a member of the church that was across the street that I had gone into, who was bilingual. He came over. He explained to them that I'm the pastor of the Brown Church. We're having a service. So they bring it down? And again, they agreed. But as I was leaving, because we were trying to decide whether we needed to call the police
Sure, sure.
or let them handle it or we handle it. And they said, "Thank you for not calling the police. Thanks for coming and talk with us." And I learned again, you learn lessons every day if you're listening. And my lesson in that instance was approach the offender. Do not call the system. If you felt your life it was being threatened, yes, but there was no life being threatened. It was just reaching out to people and I
Mm,
guess gaining their respect. They turned it down. We had we had the concert, and other than the inappropriate artist, things went pretty well. So we decided we're going to further vent. Is the term vent when you
vet.
interrogate? Vet. We're going to vet the all the artists the next time, and we're putting together a 3-page document that they have to sign saying that if they are inappropriate, they will be ushered off the stage. We told them what we would do, and we will act on it. So again, another lesson
Mm,
learned. But
mm,
this Sunday, based on what you said, I will get up in the pulpit and explain to the congregation what happened, what our position is. So
mm,
that and they didn't blame us for what happened, but I still think I need to explain it,
mm,
especially
mm,
for the people who are watching.
mm. Yeah, and sometimes, hopefully we've trained our people enough. Hey, if something weird is going on,
Yeah.
start praying.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
we've had fights break out in our,
Yikes.
one time a couple got into a fist fight in the sanctuary.
Wow.
And at first people thought it was a skit, you know. They thought, oh, this is interesting. This is going to have something to do with the sermon.